In this video, we're going to use React to make a sort of a little wage calculator or salary calculator page. And so it's going to have, we're going to use React. It's going to have a state, and the user is going to be able to interact with that state. So right now, one of the properties of the state is the wage, another is the hours, and then there is this, I think I call it result. And so then if I hit the calculate button, it will change the result part of the state. If I change the wage button, or yes, is input here, number input, then it changes the wage state, but it also reset the results. And then the hours will do the same. And so that's what I want to play with. How is this designed in React? Okay. So the code for this example is at this URL seen here in the HTML comment. In the head here, we have the link to the CDNs. I'm working with CDNs for React 18, React DOM 18, and Babel 7.21. And then I have some style, body, that background color, sea green, labels, input numbers, and an input of the button type. So that's the basics. Wrong browser. Label, input of the number type, input of the button type. Okay, so that's all the different styling. Okay, and then here is the page, and all that is sort of in design on the page is just this header and this empty div, and that div is going to be filled by React, and then the rest is the React script. So let's start looking at the React script. It uses Babel, so it's not just a pure JavaScript React script, but it is using the JSX or Babel library, I'll call it. And so then it's not just a simple script, but a Babel. Okay, so I'm going to make a class of the wage, which we need to look at. And then here at the bottom, we are actually using that wage class. So we find a what they're calling a root, so that div that I made, this create root, then turns that into a place where I'm going to sort of put dynamically the elements I made in React. So here I am establishing the place that I'm going to add my calculator, and then here I am rendering, putting my calculator onto the page. Okay, so now we need to look at the class. The rest is in the class. I'm extending the React.Component class, and I'm calling it my wage calculator, my wage calc. And this, as we said when we were looking at the interface itself, there is a state. So when we're extending it, we're going to give this this component a state, and it's going to have a property. So the state's going to have properties. This is different than the component having properties, which you sort of establish when you instantiate, but they presumably wouldn't change then. But this state are things that the user is going to interact with and change. So we're going to handle that differently. And keyword super here is referring to this. So wage, my wage calc is going to extend or sort of have a parent of React component. So super sort of refers to the parent class, and then we're going to add to that our own state. So when this component is instantiated, then you call a constructor, and we're going to get our normal stuff that the parent has when we make it, and then we're going to have in addition this state stuff that is particular to the wage example that we're making here. Okay, then we're going to have some methods. The method that you must have is the render method that just sort of shows what's on the page, but we want to have some interaction, so we want to have some additional methods here. There's a method for working with if they change the wage, which I've called here set wage. So here's the method, but let's peek down and see who calls it. And that is down here in the render where I'm putting things onto the page. I gave the input of the number type and on change, which called this set wage. And then the value was this.state.wage. So this marries the wage part of the state to the wage input. So that is establishing a connection between our state, the value, and the state. And so this is when the page refreshes, wrong browser again. When the page refreshes, I had an 8 in the state when I constructed the component, and the value of this input was set to 8. So that establishes that initial value. And then when I change the value, I call set wage. And set wage, the method is here, and we're going to change the state. And I'm using set state twice here, one to change the wage and one to change the result. And I think I could have you put in here an object in this sort of JSON notation of and I think I could have set both properties of these two properties of the state in one set state, but I did it in two for, I don't know, not a good reason. Okay. I have this comment here about the fat arrow notation. So I'm using in establishing this set wage method. We're using this sort of fat arrow notation of functions. And the good property here of the fat arrow style of function is then the function does not claim the word this. So functions often claim the word this for themselves. And then if the method is inside a class, then this isn't the object this, but the function this. And so this can be very easily confused in JavaScript. But this particular way of writing functions makes no claim on this. So this we see here is the class or the object this, which is what we want in this case. Okay. And you can, people who don't take this approach, you might see them doing this thing called bind. Okay. All right. But I'd rather not bind, but I'd rather not go through this sort of explicit bind, but that's why I like the sort of fat arrow approach here. Similarly for setting the hours. So when they change, when the user changes here, that call that set wage, and set wage changed not only the wage, but changed the result. And changing the result updated the interface. Because this part of the interface is explicitly connected to the state, to a property of the state, I don't have to do any explicit like, oh, go to the document, get element by ID, whatever the name of the div is, and change it to all these dashes. It's just if I change result, the page gets updated. Part of what React does for you. Okay, so that is setting the wage. Similarly, there's setting an hour. So when they change it's similarly called down here when here's the number for the hours, and its value is set to the hours of the state. So that's when the page refreshes. This gets set to 40. And then the onChange calls this method set hours, and set hours changes the hours part of the state to E. E is the like event object, and it brings in e.target.value is what the user changed the value to. So the E is the event, the target is that thing that sort of called the event, which was the React component, and it had a value. So then that value is used to set the hours property of our state. And we are also setting the result state, so clearing out any old answer. You need to watch here that the state is asynchronous. So I can't sort of set the state and then start calculating with that state value. It may like rush ahead and not wait for it to be established. So you can run into some sort of racing issues here if you're not careful. Okay. So I have the third, this is really a label and an input and another label and an input and a button and then a place to put the answer. So I have a number of components here. Here's the button component. Its type is a button, its value is what for a button is what it says. And then the onClick calls this calc salary method. Here is the calc salary method, again, using the fat arrow. And I'm getting the, going to the state and finding the hours, asking if it's greater than 40, do I have to pay them overtime or not? If they worked over 40 hours, then I'm paying them for their first 40 hours, their wage. And then for the hours minus 40, the excess, the overtime hours, I'm paying them their wage times 1.5, time and a half. Otherwise, I'm paying them, if they work less than 40 hours, I'm paying them their wage and their hours less than or equal, since this was greater than. And then I'm sort of preparing the salary with two decimal places and a $sign, and then I'm setting the state. So that is this, click the button, and that's where that comes from. Okay, then finally, so those, we established it in a constructor, our state. We had two methods, or three methods that we could change the state. If they change what's in the input associated with the wage, if they change what's in the input associated with the hours, if they click the button to calculate the salary. Now here we are finally making what is rendered, what is visible, going to be visible on the page. We only like to have like send back one thing. So I have an overall div containing every other thing. So one parent, one container. No, it has no siblings, but it has children. Here's a div with a label for the wage and an input. And then we looked at its main features already. It was type number. So it is typically one can type numbers in there along with dots and E. The letter E is allowed because scientific notation numbers, periods allowed for to have a fractional part. So the number type of input allows you to type numbers and some related things, a minus sign. The on change called set wage, which changed the state, and the value was established by the initial state, the wage property of the initial state. So that gave us our, like when we refreshed our value. Hours are similar. Here's the button, and then here's that's the button, and then so the wage, the hours, the button to do the calculation, and then here was the div where we had the result. Here is the result being displayed. And again, since this div contains a property of the state, there was no explicit, get document by ID div result.inner HTML equals blah. That all sort of came for free with the state. So we set the state, and all of that updating of the interface sort of gets handled for us. So that was all of the rendering. That's all the rendering, and then finally finish the class. And then I think we already showed this, but then create the root, and then render our. So all of that stuff combined was like it was one element called the my wage calc element, and we add that element to our root div wage, which was associated with the div with this ID div wage calc. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you. A sort of beginning React component with some user interactivity. There was a constructor with a state. There were methods that allowed us to interact with elements on the page, input elements, and change the state. Here was another method invoked by a button click that also changed the state. And then the render, which brought in things like labels and inputs of the number type and buttons and divs for displaying the results and what have you. And then finally, when we're done the class, using the class, establishing a root, establishing some place on the page to put all this stuff, and then rendering it onto the page. That's what I wanted to show you. Thanks for your attention.